Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Now, some of you asked me to show you around my listening room. How does it look like? What is the arrangement of sitting position, speakers, etc. And others were interested to know more about acoustic panels that you've been seeing through the videos. And especially few patrons asked me to do a video about that. And because I listen to my patrons, with some delay, I'll admit, but I do listen to you guys. By the way, thanks for your support. Today I'll talk about both. And first of all, I'll show you my listening room, which is also my living room. And as you can see, this is the location of the speakers. And behind those, I have quite a bit of space, somewhere around 80 to 90 centimeters. But if you would to measure from the front panel, which is the place where the sound comes from, and I know that in many acoustic materials, the distance behind the speaker will be measured from the beginning of the speaker, which is its acoustic center, which is the point that radiates most of the sound. And from here to the back wall, there's probably a little bit more than 1 meter, which is around 3.5 feet long. Some speakers work better closer to the wall than others, but in my experience, basically all traditionally designed speakers, they like to have some space from the back wall, and only then you can actually get a really deep soundstage and really good layering of the soundstage. And trust me guys, I've tried keeping them closer to the wall. That keeps my better half happier. It's just easier when guests come over, and if there's small children and something like that, it would be much easier to keep these in line with hi-fi rec. It would look better too, and give me more space to just use as a living space. But whenever, no matter which speaker I tested, whenever I push them that far back, I do still have a really decent tonal balance, but that feeling of the soundstage depth decreases, and I just end up pushing them more in the room. And if needed, if big companies coming over, if I know there will be small children that will try to play with these, I will just push them back for that day only basically, and then return them to their usual position for listening, where they sit like 99% of the time. Now I'll play some footage of the room so you can get the feel of it. And as you can see, I'm sitting quite close to the speakers. Basically, distance between me and speakers is quite similar than the distance between speakers themselves. We basically do form an equidistant triangle, if that's what it's called. And again, I didn't do that because it's some sort of theory that told me to do that. I actually had quite a bit of room to move this sitting couch back or forth, but here at this spot I just got best results. If I move further away, my soundstage becomes more distant from me and more flat. Here I feel that soundstage is most 3D, most palpable, having the most dimensionality, going like from the far back. And some things are even in front of the speakers, some sounds in some songs, if they're mastered that way. So basically in that sitting position, I'm getting the most of 3D feel out of my setup. And that's where I put the couch. And if you would to measure from the sitting position to this wall behind speakers, there's around 3 meters of distance. But from sitting position to the back wall, there's like 4 meters. And because of that, I basically don't have any trouble with back reflections. And I don't treat that wall, and I don't plan to treat it in any way. And because these back walls are so far away from the listening position, I don't feel that they introduce any significant interference when it comes to reflections. And I know how that sounds because I was living and listening to my hi-fi setup in a smaller room where wall behind me was just half meter away. And it does introduce quite a bit of reflections that are muddying and like bloating the overall sound signature. And if I was still in that situation, I would definitely consider doing something about it, but currently here in this space, I don't need to. So overall length of this room is around 7.2 meters. In some spaces, in some it's even more because it's open to a kitchen and to a hallway. As for the width, it's 4.4 meters wide, and I keep speakers around 2 meters, maybe even 1.9, something like that, center from center. And that means that there's more than 1 meter to the side walls, like 1.1 or something like that. And many people asked me, like, why don't you spread speakers wider? That way you would get wider soundstage. But it's not always like that. I tried, definitely. In some sense, you do get a bigger, wider sound, but because of the wall boundaries that are getting closer and closer, my sound is definitely becoming muddier and more bloated in the mid-bass and mid-range, and I feel that layering and separation is suffering. And I actually noticed that that sort of width that I get by spreading speakers more is artificial. It's coming from my room, whereas I actually notice the size of the soundstage from the recording itself less. Those tiny echoes, those faraway details, reverberation and things like that, that's a little bit muddied by my own walls. So again, this was a product of experimentation, and I settled here. Quite a bit narrow, speaker to speaker, but with a lot of space between the speakers and the side walls. And I feel that this way I get really nicely centered, focused imaging, and also good amount of soundstage width and depth from the recording itself that are not too muddied by my own walls. And when talking about room acoustics, another important thing to mention is that in Serbia here, we mostly build using concrete and bricks, and it's no different in my place. This wall is made out of bricks, this too. Outer wall with windows is made out of concrete, as is the floor, but it's covered with wooden floor actually. Ceiling is also concrete. So that means all of these walls are quite reflective. I haven't tried that, but I've heard from more experienced audiophiles that lived in US for some time but also lived here, that acoustics in houses made mostly out of wood material is definitely different and more forgiving. Like echoes and reverbs are not as strong. I cannot confirm that, but I guess it's only logical because concrete and bricks are the hardest materials and they basically reflect everything back. They don't have any porous effect, and they're also not bending. They don't have any sort of membrane effect. And because of that, it is said that in these kind of buildings, we do get most reflections. And you definitely notice that. When I moved in this room, it was quite empty with bare walls, and anything that I would do, maybe even you'll notice that just with me talking, microphone is just here, like on my arm's length up here, but you'll probably notice some echo. And if I do thing like this, you probably heard echo again. And this is even with some paneling, just a little bit of paneling already done. And now let me talk a little bit about that. So let me show you these first. These are not permanent solution. Because of that, I'm just keeping them on these stands that are actually supposed to be coffee tables for these armchairs. And luckily for me, my better half is a very patient person, and she doesn't mind that I'm already more than a half year hogging two pieces of furniture that were not intended for this use. But they're here, and currently they're keeping these panels that are basically filled with mineral wool and then closed off with some, I'm not sure what's the name for this material, I'll write it down in post-processing. They just absorb wide range of frequencies, except bass. They cannot absorb really deep bass because they do not have sufficient thickness. But that's the reason why I'm currently keeping them a little bit further away from the wall, because if I put them really close like this, I notice that influence on the bass region is getting smaller. But these spots, from my experimentation again, are not as important as these spots called first reflections. When I bought these panels, and these are made out of MDF and veneered with oak, these are what somebody would call multi-diffuser / absorber, things like that, because as you can see, this body part has some holes, and then these holes let some wavelengths enter, and behind them there's acoustic foam that's actually absorbing some wavelengths. But these are not like these, fully uncovered and bare bone, so they actually absorb everything. These have selective absorption, and these are produced by Decibel company, and I think they can be purchased worldwide. I'm not in any way connected to them or affiliated to them, but I like these panels because they do almost exactly the same thing as some more expensive brand panels. And I even heard that this exact company, Decibel, is producing panels for some of the more expensive brands. So they are buying in bulk from this company and then selling it for like 2 and even 3 times the price. By the way, these panels are 25 euros each in my country, but because they're produced abroad, after import taxes and shipping and everything, I think I settled somewhere around 35 euros, that's around 40 bucks, which I think is a really, really good deal because these are quality made, they look really nice, and natural oak veneer looks pretty good in my room. I like it. My better half likes it also. And first, I experimented with those in this place. I would put one panel here, one on top of it, same on the other side. And I noticed some improvements and I was quite happy. Mid-bass section and lower mid-range, they became tighter, more focused, better controlled, and I liked that. But later on I realized that most of that is coming from some additional bass absorption, because I was keeping these panels in place, putting some of these on top of them, and together that created quite thick absorbing block with some air behind it and really helped with upper bass and with definition overall. But because speakers are not radiating all of the frequencies equally around them, basically to the back they only radiate bass frequencies. And mid-range and higher frequencies have more of like beam quality to them. Whereas the highest frequencies are most beamy, they're most directed, while the lower you get with frequency in the frequency spectrum, the less directive sound becomes and it starts spreading wider and wider. And this will depend a lot on the speakers and do they have some sort of waveguide, is it a horn speaker? It's different for every speaker, but basically in general, it's true that lower frequencies radiate more while higher frequencies are more direct. Because of that, actually the most important place to be treated with panels, if you decide to do so, with some sort of acoustic treatment, it doesn't have to be in form of a panel, but it usually is first reflection. And first reflection is a place that if you have a helper and if you sit in your listening position and have someone hold a mirror here up against the wall and move it like this, and place at which you actually see your speaker in a mirror is a first reflection of this speaker. And if you move it slightly more, and then you see the second speaker, the one on the other side, that's the first reflection of that speaker on this side of the room. And covering those with some sort of diffusion or absorption or combined, which is basically this panel, because it does diffuse a little bit. It's not completely absorbent. It does absorb some frequencies, especially lower mid-range and upper bass. This one is tuned that way. That's the spot in the room where you're probably going to notice the biggest difference. And of course, I did the exact same thing on the other side of the room. But because there's a window there, I couldn't just put panels on the window. I piled them on top of my heating element, heating radiator. And what I noticed is when I actually located these panels on both of the room sides and treated these first reflections, the effect was quite bigger and quite more noticeable than when I was keeping them here. Because of that directivity that I mentioned, and because those first reflections are the most influential ones, the ones that will muddy the original sound coming from the speaker and from the recording the most. Now, to talk about that in depth would definitely go way past the scope of this video, so I'll just mention my quick impressions when I got these panels here. At first, I didn't mount them permanently. I would just stack them on top of the furniture here and there and actually experiment with different positionings and different panels, such as these. And I've noticed that I've definitely liked what these absorbing plus diffusing slightly is doing. I like that more than what this type is doing. If I would put these here, the sound became a little bit dull and dead, because these absorb wider band of frequencies, they absorb higher frequencies too, and the sound becomes a little bit duller. While these, made of wood with these perforations, they do quite a good job of tightening your mid-bass and your lower mid-range, while not making your sound overly dry and overly dull. And before I finally placed them here on the walls, I had several guests visiting, and I did this trick where I would put panels, make them listen to a song or two, then just remove panels. And all of them, they first notice that mid-bass, that bassy part of the whole sound is becoming firmer and more controlled. Like double bass immediately becomes more textured, and if it's playing here and before panels, I could maybe think like it's somewhere here. If I put the panels, I'm more aware where the double bass is exactly, and I feel that pluck of the strings is more precise and located more firmly in space. And that was the first thing that basically everybody noticed. But then, same as me, they've noticed also that the soundstage width expands in recordings that have decent soundstage width. And my personal take on it is that that's happening because by eliminating these reflected sound that's coming a little bit later than the direct sound, and then hazing, muddying tiny details, spatial cues, echoes. Now, when that's happening to a lesser extent, you actually notice those spatial cues and those room echoes, reverbs, all of those spatial cues, you notice more of them from the actual recording. And definitely I felt that the space increased. And I'm talking even things that are not intuitive, soundstage became a little bit taller. I kid you not. And one of my friends asked me, like, because we are putting side panels, I don't have anything on the ceiling yet. How did it become taller? For example, it felt in one song as if leading vocal, female vocal, moved from here to here. It felt like singer suddenly became slightly taller. It felt like more real life experience, like if somebody is really standing and not sitting while singing. And when I thought about it again, I realized, yeah, spatial cues from the recording, they contain cues about room and studio height too. This side reflection, it doesn't care what the information is carrying. It will obscure all of those tiny spatial informations equally. It doesn't matter if they're about width, depth, or height. It's all really precise sonic information. And it's all emitted from this speaker. And if you get some sort of muddying happening and some reflection hazing that information, you get your soundstage muffled. And I definitely experienced that without panels, everything still sounds nice, but it's a little bit thicker, muddier, more hazy, and more closed in. More in between the speakers, and it sounds a little bit smaller. With panels in place, soundstage just inflates a little bit. It gets a little bit wider, left and right, a little bit taller and more spacious area. In this position behind the speaker, these kind of panels do not have nearly as much influence as they have on these first reflections. So I'm probably going to put something more beautiful made out of wood here, but I don't know, I'm still deciding, and I'm probably going to test more with diffusers, with absorbers, maybe with some sort of bass traps. But I think that the best thing to put here is some sort of bass trapping panels or standing bass traps, because from the speakers, only the bass actually travels backwards and is reflected directly from the wall. Other frequencies are reflected from this same wall, and because of that, these panels still have some influence, but that's not first reflection. That's something that's already traveled all the way back to your room, reflected from the back wall, that was first reflection, then came back here, reflected from this again, that second reflection, and then continued, maybe to your listening position, maybe reflected a little bit more from other walls first. So they do add to the sound, but not as much as spots that are first reflections. So in the end, I really do believe that if you have basically bare, mostly bare, brick and concrete walls, like I am, it's probably a pretty good idea to at least try to put some panels, diffusion, absorptions, experiment yourself, see what works in your space and with your speakers and with their directivity and your taste and preference in the end. And you might be surprised. For me, so far, these two panels costed like only 25 euros, which is like $30. 5 of these panels, 3 on this side and 2 on the other side, because I simply didn't have space because of windows to put 3, cost me around 180, I think 180 euros, which is like 200 US dollars. And for that amount of money, I'm quite happy with the advancement I got with them, both in terms of just bass, mid-bass, precision and texture and control. But mostly I'm surprised and I'm really enjoying this increased soundstage and better spatial cues and separation. If you have that option, if you can try playing with these. I recommend it. And I'll link this company down below the video because these are the cheapest but still high quality, nicely finished true acoustic panels with measurements provided that I could find. You can find a lot of companies doing this, but some of them are quite a bit pricier for basically what it is, the same product, of the same thickness, of the same acoustic foam, similar MDF, veneered, etc, etc. Now guys, that would be all for today. I hope this video and editing will turn out right, because I was interrupted so many times. Like 3 packages with new hi-fi gear arrived during filming of this video, and I was like completely thrown out of my line of thoughts, and then I continued where I think I stopped. So if something looks a little bit rugged, it is. Please feel free to comment down below the video. What are your opinions on acoustics, on treatments? Do you think it's needed, it's not necessary, etc.? And once again, huge thanks to the patrons. I hope this answered some of your questions. See you next time. Bye.